Hey, how's it going out there, everybody? My name is Brandon. Welcome to my channel, Scourge of Vinyl. Today, I've had an idea for a video for a long time now. Had no kind of initiative or motivation to make it until now. So here we are. I have had the immense pleasure of working in record stores over the past few years here in New Jersey, and it's happened a couple of times where someone has come into the store, seen me wearing some kind of metal shirt or death metal shirt, and they asked me for recommendations, which is one of my absolute favorite parts about the job. It's something that I use this channel to do, something that I use all my social media to do is recommend people new bands. And there's also been a couple times where people have asked me where to start with specific genres, one of those being death metal. Death metal is kind of right in my wheelhouse. It's something that I listen to a lot, something that I talk about a lot. So anytime anyone asks where to start with death metal, boy, do I get excited about that question. So that's what this video is going to be about. For some of you, a lot of these records are going to be very obvious, and they are supposed to be. These are records that some people have been listening to for over getting close to 30 years now for some of these, or around that range. So without further introduction, let's start talking about some death metal records. Of course, I felt it only natural to start from the beginning. Death, scream, bloody gore. Whether this is the first true death metal album or not, I think is something that can be argued, but that's something that can be saved for a whole different video. But 1987, Scream Bloody Gore, Tampa, Florida. Doesn't get much better than this. So perfect jumping off point, perfect place to start. Really, there's gonna be a Cannibal Corpse record on this list. If you know me, you know they're my favorite band, or favorite death metal band. And you know that The Bleeding is my favorite of theirs, so I'm always going to recommend people check out The Bleeding anytime anyone asks me about any kind of metal, really. It doesn't even have to be about death metal. I tell people about Cannibal Corpse all the time. I'm always wearing Cannibal Corpse merch and shit, so people always ask me about them. And it's something that I'm more than happy to talk about. I could sit here and talk about Cannibal Corpse for hours, but that is not the purpose of this video. Morbid Angel, Altars of Madness, 1989. Man, those late 80s records and a lot of the early 90s ones are kind of what I'm gonna stick to with this video, and for good reason. It's kind of what started this whole death metal movement, and a lot of the Florida bands had a big hand in that. Speaking of Florida bands, Obituary. It could be Cause of Death, it can be Slowly We Rot. Either of these two I always recommend to people trying to get into death metal. I know that this video seems very Florida heavy and very USA heavy. Starting now, we're gonna kind of shift, but for me, I like talking about the American bands because it's where I'm from, it's what I know. But there are certainly bands all across the world that have had a huge impact on death metal. One of those being Bolt Thrower from the UK. And for me, it's got to be War Master. If anyone is asking me where to start, and if anyone's talking specifically about Bolt Thrower, they've got a decent sized catalog. So, where do you start when it comes to Bolt Thrower? I think this is the Bolt Thrower sound. You get that best with the album War Master. Another UK band, Carcass. Their catalog is a bit divisive. Some people don't really like their more polished work. A lot of people like the really early grind stuff, Reek, Symphonies, those records. Why don't we split the difference here and go with Necroticism? This was a band when I was thinking about making this list. Carcass was a band that immediately came to mind. And definitely they're a band, if I'm ever asked about recommendations, people looking for nasty sounding death metal, this was the band that started nasty. Literally flipping through texts of medical handbooks looking for lyrics, I wasn't going to leave Sweden out of the picture. Swedish death metal, that whole sound, you can attribute to a lot of the early Swedish bands, mainly Entombed, Dismember, Unleashed, bands like that. But this is the ultimate Swedeath album for me. Entombed, Left Hand Path, that buzzsaw guitar tone, trademarked with this record. You know, you hear that style and you automatically just think about bands like Entombed that paved the way for that sound. That's kind of also why I'm sticking to early records and early bands. There's been a lot of great records coming out of death metal, especially recently. So there's plenty of newer bands to recommend, but especially for someone first getting into a genre or a subgenre, I always want to talk about the bands that came first, because those bands are the bands that paved the way and have laid the foundation for the bands that we have now. Without the bands that existed before, there wouldn't be the bands of today. So you got to give it up for bands like Autopsy, and either one. Again, it was so hard when I was talking about Obituary. I can't choose between these two albums. Well, when it came to Autopsy, I couldn't choose between these two either. Mental Funeral, Severed Survival. Just absolutely mandatory stuff when it comes to death metal. And then a lot of that was like early, old school kind of death metal. There are even subgenres of death metal itself. So, people might have certain genres or certain little niches in death metal that they like more. I think Suffocation is a band that kind of is a gateway band for people looking for stuff that's more on the brutal side of things, maybe more on the technical side of things too. And what better to showcase that than their first record, Suffocation with Effigy of the Forgotten. And then if we want to lean more technical and cover, another country here besides the US, we'll go up to Canada. We'll go with Gorguts. We'll go with their first two records, Consider Dead, Erosion of Sanity. Again, tough to pick between these two albums, but this is a great band for people looking for the more technical, maybe the more avant-garde side of death metal. Maybe they, discover Obscura from this band, and, they, lean more towards the technical side of things, and Gorguts is certainly a band that opens doors to that side of death metal. And then this last one here, I don't want to scare people away from the genre, and this band is actually terrifying to listen to. I feel like Deicide, the first record, and then Legion. Again, how do I choose between these two records? Not possible. But I couldn't make this list, talking about gateway bands or like entry-level bands to the genre and leave out a band like Deicide. Again, I wouldn't recommend going straight to Deicide first. I don't want a listener to be, just barraged with just the absolute most evil death metal that you could possibly hear. Maybe try and ease people into it a little bit, but it's not for everyone. To each their own. Maybe there's some of you out there who like death metal but don't necessarily like some of these albums, and that's fine. This is all opinion based. That's what it boils down to. So there's so many other bands out there. There's so many other albums. There's so many parts of the world that I didn't get to touch in this video. But I feel like every time someone asks me recommendations for death metal, or if you're just starting to get into death metal, those are the bands and those are the albums that I go to first when I'm trying to introduce people to the genre. So if you want to talk about death metal some more, let's do it. In the comments, what are some albums that you recommend to people when they're first getting into the genre? Or what are some albums that were the gateway albums for you? Do you have friends or siblings or, relatives that are just starting to get into death metal? Let's talk about it. Let's be a community and be good to each other out there, because there's far too much shit going on in the world today for us to be at each other's throats on the fucking internet. So thank you for stopping in, watching this video, liking, commenting, subscribing, all of that cool stuff. And until the next time, take care.